7 months in, and President Trump is making some big moves in America. But not everybody's a fan. According to Gallup, 0% of Democrats are satisfied with how things are going in the U.S., compared to 76% of Republicans. Still, while Democrats refuse to give him any credit, one area stands out as a clear success, and that is crime. And if you want proof, just listen to the folks on the ground in D.C. talking about the surge of National Guard troops in the Capitol.
Ever since Trump put out the law, I say more safe, for more protection, police protection.
People is not out as much because they're aware, so I'm grateful for that aspect of it.
Even Democratic leaders seem to be envious of Trump's handling of crime. California Governor Gavin Newsom is rolling out new suppression teams to tackle crime in his state cities.
Crime's an issue, and we want to tackle it, and we continue to do more in that space. And we announced and highlighted some of the expansion. What is not contradictory, respectfully, is that we're doing it in partnership with our local communities. We did it in partnership with the Biden administration prior. We're not talking about the nationalization, the militarization of the Guard and militarizing United States cities.
A tough on crime stance is just the latest way Newsom has adopted Trump's style. But Vice President J.D. Vance thinks voters can sniff out a phony.
He's not trying to be Gavin Newsom, whoever that is. He's trying to be a fake carbon copy of Donald Trump, and it just doesn't work. You can't mimic the king. You can't mimic the master. You ought to just go and be yourself. And I think that the American people would like that a lot more than a cheap imitation of the President of the United States. Can
you fathom, Greg, politically, why the heck would Democrats think that it's popular to say, let's not crack down on the crime that's
they're figuring it out.
Everybody.
You know, Trump is making the Democrats sane again. They realize if they don't do this, it's going to lose. I got to talk about this. This is an amazing thing. I've never heard of a survey where it's 0% of anything. If you ask in a survey, would you like a spike in your eyeball? 10% will say yes. I mean, that's how it works. So what is this saying? This is like to me, like, this is a huge moment to like understand what's going on in the country. That finding is not logical. It's not reasonable. It's not sane. Yet there are millions of people who disagree with you in this country. You work with them. They're in your family. And in any other situation, you consider them reasonable. And they support Trump and they're generally happy, or they don't support Trump and maybe they're not happy. But if you believe that no reasonable people can support Trump, then how does that explain the millions of reasonable people who do? There has to be something wrong with your filter. It's unreasonable and it needs to be examined. How can you reconcile your reasonable employee or coworker or uncle or aunt and his unreasonable support for Trump? It's not about Trump at all. You have to see that. This survey is telling you it is not about Trump. It's about a media that fuels your emotional state and a Democrat Party that created a terrible sin of ascribing moral virtue to political beliefs so you could categorize somebody as evil. Now, the crime stuff is great. Trump is killing it on crime. And the effect it's having on Democrats is amazing. He's actually getting Democrats to rediscover the whole point of leadership. It's not about politics or party. It's about people. Democrats put the party before the people, survival of the party. But the party is just a necessary evil to create a structure for order. It's really about the people inside the party. What do they want? They want, cheaper food. They want cops. They want a border. So they're starting to realize that they have to deal with the people first if they want to have political survival. And they wouldn't have done it otherwise if it wasn't for the Trump effect. Trump caused the surge in law enforcement. He's making Democrats sane again. And I'll take it. I won't even credit Trump. I'll just say I want all Americans to be safe. I'm glad they're doing it.
Joey, Vance, J.D. Vance, the vice president, is accusing Newsom of being a cheap imitation of Donald Trump. Do you agree?
I don't know what he's trying to do. I mean, a lot of this is his social media team that he's put together, trying to, and I guess he'll say that he's trying to mock President Trump, but I think there's something to be envied with the way President Trump has communicated, the way he succeeded. I mean, he's never been more Teflon Don than he is right now today. I mean, he beat court cases, court rulings. It seems every day something is ruling in his favor, either personally or as president. So I think if you're a politician, you would be dumb not to want to capture some of the lightning in the bottle that President Trump has. But you can't do it by trying to be him. I mean, J.D. Vance is a great example of that. I mean, J.D. Vance is different than most politicians in D.C., but he's not Donald Trump, not even in a long shot. The best example I can give is my governor, Brian Kemp, when he first started running in the primary back in, I guess it would have been 2016, he had a couple commercials where he's in a room full of guns and he's got a guy there that's going to date his daughter. And then he had another commercial where he slammed the door on his pickup and he goes, I drive a pickup truck and I'll even use it to round up illegals. And it's like it was so fake that it wasn't his personality. It didn't do well. And then finally he just decided to be himself and he became the governor and he stayed governor. I hope every politician learns this. You can't try to be something you're not. And I think that now more than ever with President Trump, that's true.
Everybody can sniff out a phony. Jessica, CBS News looked at the D.C. crime data amid these National Guard deployments. I mean, you can't argue with the numbers. It is working. Crime is down.
Absolutely. I mean, and there were 2-week periods, though I'm sure Greg will jump in and say, but they were fake numbers. But there were 2-week periods in February and March, I think it was, where there were also no homicides. So
those were fake numbers.
But now it's real. Everything under Trump.
I did it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I like it when we tag team. Anyway, when it's Trump's people, he believes the numbers. When it's not, he says that they're fake. But sure. And those interviews were, not of the white hippies out in Georgetown or whatever. They were of minority folks, perhaps registered Democrats that were happy to see it. And we see that overwhelmingly in surveys that people do want more police presence. They don't want less, but they want it to be effective. And what will be most interesting is what happens when the 30 days are up, because Donald Trump is entitled to 30 days of this, and then he has to declare a national emergency in order to continue doing that. And if he does that, I think that Muriel Bowser will be singing a different tune about it. There is a way to work together to be able to have more effective outcomes rather than the takeover. As far as the Gavin Newsom of it all, he is not imitating him. He is mocking him. He is holding up a mirror to what Donald Trump does and how he communicates, how ridiculous these 3.5-hour-long North Korean-style cabinet meetings are.
Why was that ridiculous? You can't just say ridiculous and not say why.
Okay, if I came to a meeting, if your team for Gutfeld sat around, right, and you said, I have this idea for a joke, and they said, I've never met a funnier man than Greg Gutfeld. I think Greg Gutfeld is the funniest person.
But you don't have to watch it.
What?
No, that's voluntary. My point is, if you watch that, you learn stuff about what was going in the White House in 3.5 hours that you never would, but you're mad because they're flattering him.
I'm not mad. I'm saying that it is a particular style that most people would say most likely resembles things that go on in Russia, North Korea, or China, not in a Western democracy.
The style.
Okay. No, also the substance
but God
of
forbid
it.
The style.
All right. I also need to say about this idea that Gavin Newsom suddenly cares about crime because of Donald Trump and he's imitating him. This partnership with California Highway Patrol is from 2023. So from the Biden era, it was effective, then it was expanded. He has sent officers to Bakersfield, San Bernardino, and Oakland. They've already made over 9,000 arrests, recovered 500 stolen cars, 400 firearms. Okay. This is not about Donald Trump. This is about a way to manage your own state without actually the federal government coming in and usurping the power of democratically elected leaders.
Paul, so Jessica says that Gavin Newsom is mocking Donald Trump, but maybe he's following his playbook. I mean, sending in more and more police into these
I just told you where that came from. He did it before Donald Trump is copying Gavin Newsom.
Then what's new? Why is he holding a press conference to announce this new initiative if it's been going on since 2023? What's the new initiative? What is it that he's announcing? This hasn't been going on.
Yes,
and let's look at the outbound migrations in this country, okay? The top 5 states, New Jersey, Illinois, California, New York, Massachusetts, couldn't be bluer. Inbound, Florida, Texas, Arizona is the only one that's on fence, trending red, and the 2 Carolinas in Tennessee. People are voting with it. You can argue initiatives. You can argue crime numbers. They're going up, they're going down, et cetera. We all know they can be massaged. The bottom line is people in the cities who live in there, they know. We've talked about it on the show before. I called this constellation of blue cities a nutjob archipelago. That's what they're becoming. They're becoming quarantine zones that everybody wants to get away. And what's infuriating is that we've been through this before. We worked it out. We figured out how to get lower incarceration, how to get better enforcement. We did it in New York City. It was copied globally, and it worked. But they had to throw it out because of the fact that it came from the right, which just couldn't be countenanced. And this stuff about the National Guard, let's correct a couple of things. Number one, Donald Trump can use the National Guard where federal law is being impeded, where it's being obscured and being held back from enforcement by other people on the ground, namely the states. You can look at all kinds of historical examples for that. He has that metric. What they don't realize is when they say, we're going to stop this, we're not going to allow this to happen, they're playing into his hands because they're telling you, we're going to obstruct federal law. We're going to make sure you can't enact federal law. That gives him the window to send in the National Guard. During, let's say, what was it, about a year ago, when the New York City subways were even more uninhabitable than they are right now, Kathy Hochul sent in the National Guard. Nobody said boo.
That's right.
Why? Because there was no patina of Orange Man bad, of course. And you got Obama now weighing in like he's relevant anymore. And I'm sorry, but the ship sailed, stay in, Martha's Vineyard where they love you. But the bottom line is, not only does nobody care, but this is a guy who's saying that Donald Trump is weaponizing the military for his own purposes. And he's this fascist army is going to take over the country. Barack Obama droned 2 American citizens with no due process in Yemen. And he got the son 2 weeks later. Now, full disclosure, I supported it at the time because Anwar al-Awlaki was a bad guy. But Anwar al-Awlaki was born in New Mexico. All right? Nobody said boo. Everybody was fine with the fact. And then he gets the son 2 weeks later. The son was 16 years old.
Listen, the NSA, the IRS, I mean, he weaponized the government against United States citizens more than any president. Think
about this. Al-Qaeda killed, let's say, 3,000 people on 9/11, right? And I don't need to hear anything about it. I was there. Okay, I was there for the weeks after. I'm waiting to see if I get the cancer. All right, fair enough. The thing is here, that would be the equivalent right now of what he did. That would be the equivalent of Donald Trump saying, okay, you killed 3,000. We lose 100,000 people a year to fentanyl. So I'm going to drone the leader of the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to drone whoever's running the factories in Southeast China making fentanyl and other synthetics that are shipped to America that are killing all of these people. Now, if Donald Trump did that, the entire world would melt down. But that's the equivalent. And that's Obama now saying that Donald Trump is fascist. And again, just to play fair, I supported Obama at the time against a lot of other people. I said, no, he was right. It comes under the authorization of military. It was a branch of al-Qaeda. That was tenuous, but I supported it at the time. But the double standard is what drives me crazy. Donald Trump can do this. We're going to get to it later in the show. Donald Trump can do what he's doing with the National Guard here, and we're losing our cities, and we shouldn't give them up to the crazies.
Great points, Paul. Appreciate your expertise on all of that.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.